The wind howled across the plains of Kansas as 13-year-old Isaiah Thompson huddled in the corner of the cold barn, his thin body shaking with fear and exhaustion. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, he could see the orange glow of the campfire where the three men sat drinking and planning his punishment for the morning. Come sunrise, boy, Boss Garrett had snarled earlier that evening, you're gonna get the whipping of your life. 20 lashes for losing them horses, and 20 more for the sass you gave me when I asked where they went. Isaiah's crime had been falling asleep while watching the herd during a thunderstorm. Lightning had spooked the animals, and 6 valuable horses had broken free and scattered across the prairie. He had spent all day searching for them, finding only 4 before darkness forced him to return to camp empty-handed and face Garrett's wrath. The boy pressed his face against his knees, trying to hold back tears. He had been working for Garrett's outfit for 8 months now, ever since the cholera outbreak that killed his parents and left him with nowhere else to go. The work was brutal, the pay was almost nothing, and Garrett treated him worse than he treated his animals. But Isaiah had endured it all because he had no choice. Orphans on the frontier had few options, and at 13, he was too young to strike out on his own. So he had suffered through Garrett's cruelty, hoping that someday he might earn enough money to start a new life somewhere far away from this misery. Now, as he listened to the men discussing exactly how they planned to tie him up for his whipping, Isaiah wondered if he would even survive until sunrise. Garrett was known for his violent temper, and 40 lashes could kill a grown man, let alone an undernourished boy. Maybe we should just get it over with tonight, suggested Curly Pete, one of Garrett's hired hands. Boy ain't gonna sleep anyway, knowing what's coming. Nah, Garrett replied, his voice slurred with whiskey. Want him to think about it all night. Want him to suffer with the waiting. Come dawn, we'll string him up proper and teach him what happens when you cost me money. Isaiah closed his eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. He had prayed so many times over the past months, begging God to deliver him from this nightmare. But his situation had only gotten worse. Maybe God had forgotten about orphan boys who had nothing to offer and nowhere to go. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Isaiah's heart leap with desperate hope. Maybe it was a traveler, someone who might intervene on his behalf. But his hope quickly died as he recognized the voices of the other 2 men in Garrett's crew, returning from town with supplies and more whiskey. Boss, called out Jake Wilson as he dismounted. You hear about that rancher asking around town about work? Hands what rancher? Garrett growled. Big fellow named Robert Hayes. Owns the Circle H spread about 20 miles east of here. Said he's looking for reliable help, paying fair wages and treating his people decent. Garrett spat into the fire. Decent wages makes for soft workers. My boys earn their keep the hard way. Maybe so, Jake continued, but word is Hayes don't stand for no mistreatment of his hands. Fired a foreman last year for beating a worker. Some folks say he's got a soft spot for kids who got nowhere else to go. Isaiah's heart ached at this description of a place where people were treated with kindness and respect. It sounded like paradise compared to his current situation, but it might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did him. Well, that Hayes fellow can keep his soft ways, Garrett snarled. I run my outfit the way I see fit, and tomorrow morning I'm gonna make sure this worthless boy understands his place. As the night wore on, Isaiah listened to the men's conversation grow more slurred and violent with each bottle they emptied. They discussed the best way to tie him up, debated whether to use a bullwhip or a leather strap, and argued about how many lashes it would take to teach him proper respect. Boy's probably plotting to run off, Curly Pete observed. Maybe we should post a guard. Where's he gonna run to? Garrett laughed. Middle of nowhere, no horse, no supplies. He tries to run, the prairie will kill him before he gets 10 miles. Nah, he'll be right here come morning, ready to take his medicine. But Isaiah was indeed thinking about running. The idea of facing 40 lashes terrified him more than the prospect of dying alone on the prairie. At least if he ran, he would die free instead of dying as Garrett's victim. As the men's voices grew quieter and the fire burned lower, Isaiah began to plan his escape. He would wait until they were all asleep, then slip out of the barn and head east toward the Circle H ranch that Jake had mentioned. Maybe he would die trying to reach it. But anything was better than waiting for dawn and the whipping that would surely kill him. But just as Isaiah was gathering his courage to make his break for freedom, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the sound of Garrett's boots approaching the barn. "Thought I'd check on our guest." Garrett's voice was thick with whiskey and malice. "Make sure he ain't getting any ideas about running off." The barn door creaked open, and Garrett's bulky silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the dying campfire. Isaiah pressed himself deeper into the corner, hoping the shadows would hide him. "I see you there, boy," Garrett growled. "Probably thinking about making a run for it, ain't you? Well, let me save you the trouble." Garrett produced a length of rope and began fashioning a crude lasso. "Gonna tie you up nice and secure. Make sure you're still here come sunrise for your appointment with my whip." Isaiah's heart pounded as Garrett approached. This was it. His last chance for freedom was slipping away with each step. The cruel foreman took toward his hiding place. "Please, Mr. Garrett," Isaiah whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "I'll find them other horses. I'll work twice as hard. Just please don't whip me." Garrett laughed coldly. "Too late for begging, boy. Time you learned that actions have consequences, and your consequence is gonna hurt real bad." Just as Garrett reached for Isaiah with the rope, the barn was suddenly filled with the sound of hoof beats and voices calling out from the darkness. "Hello, the camp," a deep voice boomed across the prairie. "Robert Hayes here, looking for Boss Garrett." Garrett froze, his rope halfway to Isaiah's wrists. Through the barn walls, they could see the silhouettes of several riders approaching the campfire, their horses' breath visible in the cold night air. "What the hell does Hayes want at this hour?" Garrett muttered, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Isaiah's heart leaped with desperate hope. The rancher Jake had mentioned, the one who treated his workers fairly and had a soft spot for children, had arrived just when Isaiah needed him most. Maybe, just maybe, this was the answer to all those prayers Isaiah had thought God wasn't hearing. "Stay put, boy," Garrett snarled, dropping the rope. "I'll deal with you after I get rid of these visitors." As Garrett stomped out of the barn to meet the unexpected guests, Isaiah crept to the wall and peered through a gap in the boards. In the flickering light of the campfire, he could see a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s dismounting from a powerful bay horse. Two other riders flanked him, their faces serious and alert. This had to be Robert Hayes, and something about his bearing, his confident posture, told Isaiah that here was a man who might actually be willing to help a desperate boy in need. Now, Isaiah faced the most important decision of his young life. Should he stay hidden and hope for the best, or should he risk everything by calling out for help from a stranger, who might be his only chance at salvation? As the men began talking around the campfire, Isaiah made his choice. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to bet his life on the kindness of a man he had never met. Subscribe to our channel to see what happens next. Will Robert Hayes prove to be Isaiah's salvation, or will this unexpected visit only make things worse? For the terrified boy, don't miss the dramatic next chapter where courage meets compassion under the prairie stars. Robert Hayes dismounted from his bay horse with the fluid grace of a man who had spent most of his 45 years in the saddle. Behind him, his two ranch hands, Miguel Santos and Tom Bradley, remained mounted but alert, their hands resting casually near their weapons. Hayes had not ridden 20 miles in the middle of the night on a social call. "Garrett," Hayes said with a nod, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being respected. "Apologize for the late hour, but I had some business that couldn't wait." Boss Garrett stumbled slightly as he approached, the whiskey making him unsteady on his feet. "Hayes, what brings you out here in the middle of the night?" "Looking for a boy," Hayes replied directly. "Isaiah Thompson, about 13 years old. Been working for your outfit. His aunt in Kansas City hired me to find him. Make sure he's being treated proper." Isaiah's heart nearly stopped. He had no aunt in Kansas City, no family anywhere that he knew of. But somehow, this rancher was here looking for him, offering him a lifeline he had never dared hope for. Garrett's face darkened with suspicion and anger. "Boy's fine, working hard, learning the trade. Ain't no concern of yours how I run my business. Actually, it is my concern," Hayes said calmly. "See, I've been hearing stories around the territory about your methods, Garrett. Stories about workers being mistreated, children being abused. That kind of thing tends to draw attention from the territorial authorities. From his hiding place in the barn, Isaiah could see the tension building around the campfire. Curly Pete and Jake Wilson had sobered up quickly at the mention of territorial authorities, while Garrett's face was growing red with rage. "You got no right coming onto my property making accusations," Garrett snarled. "This is open range, Garrett, public land, and that boy is what I came for." Hayes took a step closer to the fire, his tall frame casting a long shadow. "Why don't you call him out here so I can see for myself that he's being treated right? Boys, sleeping, been a long day, then wake him up." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Isaiah made his decision. Taking all of his courage in his hands, he stepped out of the barn and into the firelight. "Mr. Hayes?" Isaiah called out, his voice shaking but clear. "Sir, I'm Isaiah Thompson." Hayes turned toward the boy, and Isaiah saw the rancher's expression change as he took in the sight before him. Isaiah knew what Hayes was seeing, a thin, frightened child with hollow cheeks, wearing clothes that were little more than rags, bearing the marks of months of hard labor and poor treatment. "Isaiah," Hayes said gently, "are you all right, son?" Before Isaiah could answer, Garrett stepped between them. "Boy's fine, just tired from a hard day's work. Now you've seen him, you can go." "Actually," Hayes said, his voice growing harder, "I think the boy can speak for himself." "Isaiah, how have you been treated here?" Isaiah looked at Garrett's furious face, then at Hayes's kind but determined expression. This was his moment of truth, his chance to escape the nightmare his life had become. But he also knew that if Hayes left without him, his situation would become far worse than a simple whipping. "Sir," Isaiah said, his voice growing stronger, "they said they're gonna whip me at sunrise. 40 lashes for losing some horses in a storm. Boss Garrett, he was just about to tie me up when you arrived." Hayes's expression darkened like a thunder cloud. 40 lashes for a child, boys lying, Garrett protested. "Just trying to get out of his punishment for costing me money, Miguel." Hayes called to one of his men. "What do you see when you look at this boy?" Miguel Santos, a weathered vaquero with kind eyes, studied Isaiah carefully. "I see a Nego who has not eaten enough food for many weeks. I see marks on his arms from ropes and hard treatment. I see fear in his eyes, the kind that comes from living with violence. That's what I see too," Hayes said quietly. "Tom, your thoughts?" Tom Bradley, a young cowboy barely older than Isaiah, shook his head sadly. "Reminds me of myself when I was his age, Mr. Hayes. Before you took me in and showed me what decent treatment looked like." Garrett was growing desperate and angry. "You men got no right interfering with my business. That boy belongs to me until his contract is up." "What contract?" Hayes demanded. "Show me the papers." Garrett's silence spoke volumes. There was no contract, just the exploitation of a desperate orphan with nowhere else to go. "Isaiah," Hayes said gently, "would you like to come work for me instead? Fair wages, decent food, and I guarantee no one will lay a hand on you in anger. You can't take my worker." Garrett shouted, his hand moving toward his gun. "I got rights, that's..." When Hayes showed why he was respected throughout the territory, his own weapon appeared in his hand with lightning speed, trained on Garrett before the other man could clear leather. "The only right you have, Garrett, is the right to remain silent while I take this boy to safety," Hayes said calmly. "Now, you can make this easy, or you can make it hard. But either way, Isaiah is leaving with me." Curly Pete and Jake Wilson started to move toward their weapons, but Miguel and Tom were ready for them, their rifles appearing with practiced ease. "Gentlemen," Hayes continued conversationally, "I should mention that I sent word to the territorial marshal before I left my ranch, told him where I was going and why. If I don't return by noon tomorrow with this boy safe and sound, he'll be paying you a visit with a squad of deputies." The fight went out of Garrett's men as they realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Hayes had planned this rescue carefully, leaving nothing to chance. "Isaiah," Hayes said without taking his eyes off Garrett, "go get your things. You're coming home with me." "I don't have no things, sir," Isaiah replied. "Just the clothes on my back." Hayes's jaw tightened with anger at this evidence of how badly the boy had been treated. "Then we'll get you properly outfitted once we get to the ranch. Miguel, bring up the spare horse." As Miguel led a gentle mare forward, Garrett made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "Boy, if you leave with these men, don't come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you made." Isaiah looked at the man who had made his life miserable for 8 long months and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, the courage to stand up for himself. "Mr. Garrett," Isaiah said quietly, "the only mistake I made was staying here as long as I did. I won't be coming back, not ever." As Isaiah climbed onto the spare horse, his hands shaking with excitement and relief, Hayes kept his weapon trained on Garrett and his men. "One more thing, Garrett," Hayes said as they prepared to leave. "If I hear of you mistreating any other workers, children especially, I'll be back, and next time I won't be nearly so polite about it." As they rode away into the darkness, Isaiah looked back one last time at the camp that had been his prison for so many months. The sun was just beginning to touch the eastern horizon, painting the sky with the first hints of dawn. "Mr. Hayes," Isaiah said as they put distance between themselves and Garrett's outfit, "why did you really come for me? I don't have no aunt in Kansas City." Hayes smiled, the first warm expression Isaiah had seen in months. "Son, sometimes a man hears about a child in trouble and decides to do something about it. Truth is, I was an orphan once myself. Know what it's like to be alone and scared with nowhere to turn. You made up that story about my aunt. Let's just say I embellished the truth a little to give me legal standing to intervene," Hayes replied. "Sometimes you have to bend the rules a bit to do what's right." As the sun continued to rise, casting golden light across the prairie, Isaiah felt something he hadn't experienced since his parents died: hope for the future. He was riding toward a new life with a man who had risked his own safety to save a boy he barely knew. "Mr. Hayes," Isaiah said, "I promise I'll work harder than anybody. I'll earn my keep and then some. I'm sure you will, son. But first, you're going to eat some decent food, get some proper clothes, and learn that work doesn't have to mean suffering. There's a difference between honest labor and abuse, and you're going to learn what that difference feels like. Subscribe to our channel to see the powerful conclusion. How will Isaiah adapt to life on a ranch where kindness replaces cruelty? Will Boss Garrett accept defeat, or will he try to get his revenge? Don't miss the final chapter that shows how one man's courage to stand up for what's right can transform a boy's entire future. 6 months had passed since that night when Robert Hayes had ridden into Boss Garrett's camp and changed Isaiah Thompson's life forever. The transformation in the boy was nothing short of miraculous. Gone was the hollow-eyed, frightened waif who had cowered in a barn waiting for a brutal whipping. In his place stood a confident 14-year-old who had grown 3 inches, gained 20 pounds, and discovered what it meant to be treated with dignity and respect. The Circle H Ranch had become Isaiah's sanctuary, a place where hard work was balanced with fair treatment, where mistakes were learning opportunities rather than excuses for violence, and where every person was valued regardless of their past. "Isaiah," Robert called out as the boy expertly guided a young colt through its paces in the training corral. "You've got a real gift with the horses. Never seen anything like it." Isaiah beamed with pride at the praise. Under Robert's patient guidance, he had discovered a natural talent for working with animals, especially the difficult ones that others had given up on. It was as if his own experience with fear and mistreatment had given him special insight into helping frightened creatures learn to trust again. "Thanks, Mr. Hayes," Isaiah replied, sliding down from the fence. "This little fellow just needed someone to be patient with him. He's been hurt before, so he's scared of people. But once he learns we won't hurt him, he'll be the best horse on the ranch." Robert smiled at the wisdom in those words. Isaiah often spoke about the animals in terms that clearly reflected his own journey. From fear to trust, it was one of the many ways the boy had grown since coming to the Circle H. Life on the ranch had been everything Robert had promised and more. Isaiah earned fair wages for his work, ate at the same table as everyone else, and slept in a warm, comfortable bunkhouse with the other. Hence, more importantly, he had found something he had never known before: a family. Miguel Santos had become like an older brother, teaching Isaiah to rope and ride with the skill of a true vaquero. Tom Bradley, who had his own history as a rescued orphan, had become Isaiah's closest friend and confidant, and Robert Hayes had become the father figure Isaiah had never known he needed. But their peaceful life was about to be disrupted. Mr. Hayes called out Charlie Morrison, the ranch foreman. As he rode up to the corral at a gallop, "We got trouble coming. Boss Garrett and about 6 men." Riding hard toward the ranch house, Isaiah felt his stomach clench with old fear. He had hoped never to see Garrett again, had convinced himself that the cruel foreman had forgotten about him and moved on to tormenting other victims. "What do you think he wants?" Isaiah asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Robert's expression was grim but determined, probably still nursing his wounded pride from that night 6 months ago. Some men can't stand being shown up, especially when it involves losing control over someone they considered their property. The ranch hands began gathering as word spread of the approaching riders. Miguel checked his rifle, Tom made sure his pistol was loaded, and Charlie started positioning men at strategic points around the ranch buildings. Robert Hayes commanded fierce loyalty from his workers, and they were prepared to defend both him and Isaiah from whatever Garrett had planned. "Isaiah," Robert said quietly, "I want you to stay close to me. Don't let Garrett provoke you into doing anything rash." "Yes, sir," Isaiah replied. Though his hands were shaking slightly, the thought of facing Garrett again brought back all the terror and helplessness he had felt during those terrible months. Garrett and his men rode into the ranch yard like an invading army, their horses lathered from hard riding and their faces set with grim determination. Garrett himself looked worse than Isaiah remembered, his clothes dirty and his eyes bloodshot from too much drinking. "Hayes," Garrett shouted as he dismounted, "I come to collect what's mine." Robert stepped forward calmly, Isaiah at his side. "Garrett, you're trespassing on private property. State your business and move on." "My business is that boy there," Garrett snarled, pointing at Isaiah. "He owes me 8 months of work, and I aim to collect it. The boy doesn't owe you anything." Robert replied firmly, "He worked for you, you treated him badly, and now he works for me. That's the end of it." "Like hell it is." Garrett's voice rose with anger. "That boy ran off in the middle of the night. Cost me time and money tracking him down. He belongs to me until he pays off his debt." Isaiah felt the familiar terror rising in his chest, but then he looked around at the faces of his new family. Miguel gave him an encouraging nod. Tom stepped closer in solidarity, and Robert's steady presence reminded him that he was no longer alone and helpless. "Mr. Garrett," Isaiah said, his voice stronger than he felt, "I don't owe you nothing. I worked harder than any grown man for 8 months, got paid almost nothing, and got treated worse than your animals. Any debt between us, you owe me." Garrett's face turned red with rage. "You little ungrateful whelp. After all I did for you, giving you work when no one else would. What you did," Robert interjected coldly, "was exploit a child who had no other options. That's not generosity, Garrett, that's cruelty. And what you did," Garrett shot back, "was steal my worker in the middle of the night. That makes you a thief, Hayes." The tension in the ranch yard was thick enough to cut with a knife. Garrett's men had their hands near their weapons, while the Circle H hands were clearly ready to defend their home and their friend. "Tell you what, Garrett," Robert said with dangerous calm. "Why don't we settle this the old-fashioned way, you and me, right here, right now? Winner takes all." Garrett's eyes lit up with cruel anticipation. He outweighed Robert by 50 pounds and had a reputation as a brutal fighter. "You're on, Hayes, when I beat you down. I'm taking the boy, and anyone else who wants to interfere can join you in the dirt." But Isaiah stepped forward before the fight could begin. "No, Mr. Hayes, this is my fight." "Isaiah, no," Robert protested. "You don't have to prove anything to this man." "Yes, I do," Isaiah replied with quiet determination. "For 8 months, I was scared of him. For 8 months, I let him make me feel worthless and weak. But I'm not that scared little boy anymore." Isaiah turned to face Garrett directly. "Mr. Garrett, you can't have me back because I'm not the same person who was afraid of you. You taught me what cruelty looks like, but Mr. Hayes taught me what strength really means." Real strength isn't about hurting people who can't fight back. Real strength is about protecting those who need help. Pretty words, boy, Garrett sneered. But you're still coming with me. No, he's not. The voice came from behind Garrett, and everyone turned to see a group of riders approaching from the east. Leading them was a tall man wearing a badge that glinted in the afternoon sun. Marshal Davidson, Robert said with obvious relief. Good to see you, Hayes. The marshal replied with a nod. Got your message about trouble brewing. Looks like I arrived just in time. Garrett's face went pale as he recognized the territorial. Marshal and his deputies. This is a private matter, Marshal. No call for law involvement. Actually, there is, Marshal Davidson replied, producing a folded paper from his vest. Got a warrant here for your arrest, Garrett. Seems several of your former workers have come forward with complaints about unpaid wages and physical abuse. Territory takes a dim view of that sort of thing. As the deputies moved to arrest Garrett and his men, the fight went out of them completely. They had come expecting to intimidate a boy and his protector, but instead found themselves facing the full weight of territorial law. This ain't over, boy, Garrett snarled as the handcuffs were applied. Soon as I get out, I'll be back for you. Isaiah looked at the man who had terrorized him for so long and felt something unexpected. Pity, Mr. Garrett. I hope someday you learn that there's a better way to live than hurting people. But whether you do or not, I'm not afraid of you anymore. As Garrett and his men were led away, Isaiah felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The last link to his terrible past was finally broken. How did you know to come? Robert asked the marshal. Tom Bradley. Sent word a few days ago, Davidson replied. Said he'd heard rumors that Garrett was planning something. Figured it was better to be safe than sorry. Isaiah looked at Tom with gratitude and amazement. You did that for me. Tom grinned and clapped Isaiah on the shoulder. That's what family does. Partner, we look out for each other. That evening, as the ranch settled back into its peaceful routine, Isaiah sat with Robert on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Mr. Hayes, Isaiah said quietly, thank you for standing up for me, for giving me a chance to become something better than what I was. Robert smiled and put his arm around the boy's shoulders. Isaiah, you were always something special. You just needed someone to help you see it. That night 6 months ago, when I stood between you and that whipping, I wasn't just protecting your body, I was protecting your future. What do you mean? I mean that every child deserves the chance to grow up without fear, to discover their talents and strengths, to become the person they're meant to be. Garrett would have broken your spirit along with your body. I couldn't let that happen. Isaiah nodded, understanding completely. Mr. Hayes, I want to be like you someday. I want to help kids who are in the same situation I was in. I believe you will, son. In fact, I've been thinking about expanding the ranch, maybe setting up a program to help other orphan children learn useful trades. Would you be interested in helping me with something like that? Isaiah's eyes lit up with excitement. More than anything, sir, I know what it's like to have nowhere to go and no one to care. If we can help other kids find what I found here, that would be the best thing ever. Years later, the Circle H Ranch would become famous throughout the territory as a place where lost children could find new families and fresh starts. Isaiah Thompson, the boy who had once waited in terror for a sunrise whipping, grew up to become one of the most respected men in Kansas, known for his kindness to children and his unwavering belief that everyone deserved a second chance. And it all began with one man's decision to stand in the way of cruelty, to shield an innocent child from harm, and to prove that sometimes the greatest courage is shown not in facing down an enemy, but in protecting someone who cannot protect themselves. The sunrise that Isaiah had once feared as the herald of his destruction had instead become the dawn of a new life filled with hope, purpose, and the knowledge that he would never again face the darkness alone. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories from the American frontier. This tale of Isaiah and Robert shows us that true strength comes not from inflicting pain, but from preventing it, and that sometimes standing up for what's right means standing between evil and innocence. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join us for more emotional journeys that prove how one person's courage can change the course of another's entire life. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that there are still people in this world willing to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves.